Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be focusing on person-centred approaches to risk. Presentation should last for approximately 20 minutes and then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions via the questions box. Please feel free to type in any questions there throughout the presentation and then Kerry will raise them at the end. We all take risks in our lives, from getting in your car to go to work every day, to changing jobs, to embarking upon new relationships. Yet, in health and social care, risk is often perceived as dangerous. Fear of blame and litigation cultures can result in overprotective approaches to risk, and traditional methods of risk assessment are often full of charts and scoring systems which can lose sight of the person and what matters to them, as they become lost within packages and pages of tick boxes, statistics and reports. When people have choice and control over their lives, self-determination, then this naturally involves risks, and this needs to be recognised, understood and minimised wherever possible. But this doesn't mean that it should be avoided at all costs. If we're going to support people to have ordinary life chances in a way that makes sense to them, then we must pay attention to the culture of the organisation. Some organisations have great risk assessment that on paper appear to encourage a risk-enabling approach. However, if the people who work within the organisation are fearful of blame, feel that decisions have been imposed upon them and that they've been excluded from the exploration of the risks, then any chances of positive solutions are likely to fail. A risk-enabling culture requires clear leadership and guidance, consistent messages where people are encouraged to get involved in debates, and the ability to reflect on and learn from good tries. In the book, Creating Person-Centred Organisations by Stephen Stirk and Helen Sanderson, they state that in a person-centred organisation, there has to be an alignment between the behaviours and attitudes you want to see in frontline staff and what's in the policies and procedures of the organisation. Without paying attention to this, there's a real risk that there'll be different messages to staff about what should be done and the desired way of doing it. I've come across several examples of where policy and procedure gets in the way of organisations. It gets in the way of what organisations hope to achieve. For example, training their staff in community building, yet having inflexible policies around professional boundaries and criminal checks. One story I remember really well was a staff member who was enthusiastic about trying to make the people he supported with a learning disability better connected in their local neighbourhood. It was summertime and he thought he would capitalise on the good weather and work with the people he supported to throw a barbecue in his street and invite their neighbours. He thought that this would provide a relaxed and informal opportunity for people to get to know each other over food and a few drinks. When he went back to his manager, he was told that unfortunately this wasn't possible as there was a no barbecues policy due to health and safety. The process we'll be exploring today helps us to take stock before finding solutions. It creates a collaborative thinking environment that ensures that decisions are made from a basis of having full information. It's not a quick fix because many issues of risk we can deal with quickly, such as issues around hoists or kettle tippers, and we don't want to be risk assessing people in the same way that we risk assessed objects. The Department of Health guidance supports a person-centred approach to risk, as does the Health and Safety Executive, and in their guide, the principles of sensible risk management, they define this as enabling innovation and learning rather than stifling them. So as providers and people around people who may be vulnerable and we need to think about their health and safety, what we want to do is not overprotect them. The process that we use today covers these four areas. We start by thinking about what we're trying to achieve, and How can we do this in a way that enables people to have choice and control as contributing members of their community? We then think about who needs to be involved with the person to achieve this. So when I first started off in provider management, the typical way that we would do a risk assessment would be the manager would go in the office and write the risk assessment. Person-centred approach to risk starts by thinking about who are the key people in somebody's life who would really need to get around the table to think well about risk. We then think about the process that helps us think at our best together around what people want to achieve or change in their life, how we can record it, and crucially, how we can implement the actions that we come to. The final step is around reviewing, and I've seen some really good, robust risk assessments that have gathered dust in filing cabinets and haven't been part of what people have been doing every day. And when we don't keep the risk process or risk management alive, what happens is we often go back to our default ways of working because it's easier. So the process is different to many processes that you may come across. Most risk assessment processes begin by identifying the hazards. A person-centred approach to risk starts with an understanding of the person and what matters to them. Once we have this understanding of them, we then figure out what current reality looks like. So we think about where are we now. We then think about where do we want to be. So Stephen Covey says we should begin with the end in mind if we want to be successful. So we look to what success looks like from different perspectives. We then look back and pay attention to what we've tried and learned already. And at this point, we've captured full information, which will really inform us when we think about what should we do next. So the key is around supporting people to be healthy and safe whilst ensuring they get what's important to them. Nobody wants to be responsible for something bad happening. This isn't just about blame or litigation. It's also about people's own conscience. So it's important that we approach risk from a balanced perspective, ensuring that we're focused on how the person wants to live their life, have things that give them joy and fulfillment, things to look forward to and aspire to, but how to keep them healthy and safe enough to do this as well. So the best place to start is with your one-page profile. And the 3 sections in this are really important if we're thinking about risk. When we think about what we like and admire about the person, this isn't just about thinking about the good things about the person. This is an exploration of capacity, gifts and talents, things that when we're thinking about the risk we want to build on or build up and pay good attention to. We then think about what matters to the person, what gives them joy, comfort, what makes life worth living, things to look forward to. And then we think about what's important to them and how we should best support them to stay healthy and safe and members of their community. We then do the current reality analysis by thinking about what's working, not working from different perspectives, and we would always start from the person's perspective. Making sure that we're capturing everybody's perspective gives us an agenda. We have an agenda of some agreed things that we should be working on, and we have an agenda that tells us where people don't agree, and that opens up some really interesting and useful conversations. Once we've figured out what's working and not working, we're in a better position to figure out what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And we look at it from a solution-focused perspective. So what are the risks and what do we need to solve together? We then look at what's possible. So we think about what does success look like from different perspectives. Again, starting from the perspective of the person, thinking about family or community, what about staff who might be working with the person, and what about the organisational perspective as well. We then look back and we pay good attention to any good tries or attempts or anything that we've done to try and mitigate the risk in the past, and we learn really well from this. I used to work with somebody who had acquired a severe reputation and the label of challenging behaviour. When we were exploring risk, thinking about this person, and we looked at what we tried, one of the things that we tried was we had collected ABC charts. And what we learned was that we had a lot of them. What we were pleased about, that staff were really good at following procedure and filling out ABC charts. What we were concerned about was that filling in the ABC charts didn't make any difference at all to the risk. So when we think about what we need to do next, what we need to think about was where we were placing our energy, and clearly the ABC charts weren't a useful way of managing the risks. The history of the issue is really important to pay attention to. I love this cartoon of Roadrunner, and when I was a child and I used to watch this programme, I loved the fun of it. However, every week I thought to myself, well, why is he trying a new plan? So the basic principle of Roadrunner is that Wile E. Coyote wants to catch him. So every week he comes up with a cunning plan and something always goes wrong. The cunning plans are often really ingenious and have some really interesting elements to them. However, rather than making an adjustment to the plan because he's stopped to learn from what's gone wrong, he starts a new one from scratch. Thereby, the Roadrunner continually evades capture. Often when we think about risk, at the forefront of our minds are what are the consequences if things go wrong, which is important to think about. What we seldom pay attention to is what are the consequences if we don't support the person to take the risk. So we need to pay attention to what's lost by the person not progressing or taking the risk as well. And we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the law. So what about the Human Rights Act? What about the Mental Capacity Act? So that we're behaving within the legal framework. Once we've captured all this information, we're at a stage where we can test out whether the ideas measure up. A story that I heard when I was working in Wiltshire was from a learning disability nurse, and she had responsibility for best interest meetings, and it had come to her attention that a young woman who was deemed not to have the capacity to make a decision was at risk from aspirating, and her team were up in arms saying, but if you peg feed her, if you put a gastrostomy in, then she won't have any quality of life because the most important thing in her life was eating chocolate. The nurse had done some person-centered thinking work and said, well, before we make a decision, let's have a look at her one-page profile and let's come up with some ideas that help us think about what matters to her as well as what matters for her. So using this grid helps us to think about what ideas might help us to pay attention to what matters to the person from an important to or happy perspective, as well as what keeps them healthy and safe. So two ideas came up immediately. One was don't peg feed her so she continue to have chocolate, and peg feed her and then she can't continue to have chocolate. So if we said don't peg feed her, she would be happy, get what's important to her, but unsafe, which conflicts with important for her. So we would plot that idea in the right quadrant. If she was peg fed, she would be unhappy, so it conflicts with what's important to her, but safe. Corresponds with what's important for her. So in the bottom left-hand quadrant. Neither of these seemed good enough until somebody came up with the idea that they find a way that she could have chocolate every day whilst being peg fed. And this idea was deemed to be in the top left-hand quadrant, so happy important 2 and safe important 4. And the idea that they came up with was that although she didn't need to be peg fed, was that she could have chocolate shaved upon her tongue every single day, so she would still experience the sensations. So this Happy Safe Grid helps us to measure out and test the ideas in relation to a person-centred approach. Once we've done that, we think about what ideas we're going to try, and we figure out what the options are, check out whether we're going to try them or not, and then we give our reasoning for that. And this is so we're evidencing justifiable decision making. So 6 months down the line, when somebody says, well, why did you go in that direction as opposed to that direction? You can go back and check out why, and that should link back to the information that you've gathered throughout the process. It's really important, wherever possible, to ensure that the person has control over decisions. So one of the things that it's possible to do within this process is to create a decision-making agreement that checks out the important decisions, figures out how the person must be involved, but is also clear about who makes the final decision. We also need to think about when things don't go right, and we need to think about whether we need any contingency in place. So what do we need to do if things go wrong to keep the person immediately safe? Who do we need to involve if that happens as well? We also need to think about how we review progress so that we're keeping the risk assessment alive, and rather than it just being a risk assessment, it becomes part and parcel of the support plan, so ingrained in the support that that person needs and gets in a much more organic way. So the process fits with the holy grail of risk management, the risk management model, which comes from Bates and Silberman. And what they said was, we must involve people who use services and relatives in risk assessment. And this is one of the most fundamental tenets of any person-centred approach. The process that we put together considers carefully the people that need to be involved and uses the relationship circle to help the person and their allies identify key people who could form the person's circle of support. Here are some of the person-centred thinking tools that evidence the involvement of people who use services and their relatives. We need to ensure that we're positive and informed risk-taking. And the person-centred approach to risk should be built around a positive view of the person and seeks to learn what the person's gifts and skills are, what people like and admire about them, as well as what's necessary to keep her and others safe whilst taking the risk. The management of risk should match the gravity of personal harm, so using person-centred thinking tools provides some flexibility. So the consequences grid really helps us to think well about that. We should contextualise the behaviour, so think about why did the person behave in this way at this time and in this situation. So part of the person-centred approach involves gathering previous information, including the history of the experience of the risk from the person's perspective and other people's perspectives as well. Defensible decision-making ensures that there's an explicit and justifiable rationale for the risk management decisions. We need to have a golden thread that ensures that it goes back to what matters to the person and ensures that we can justify why one decision was made over another at any given time. We should be creating a learning culture. So a person-centred approach emphasises the importance of learning through use of learning and reflective tools like the learning log, the 4+1, and the working and not working tool, and this helps to embed a positive risk enabling approach in any culture. And we need to think about tolerable risk. So a key aspect of the person-centered approach to risk is that it uses creative methods to help the person move from happy but unsafe situations to ones where they and the community are safer and move away from being unhappy. Services are really good at highlighting the downside of risk, but poor at thinking about the great opportunities that facing up to risk and finding positive solutions in creative and mindful ways could mean for people, their families and their communities. At this time, we also need to think about more creative ways of managing risk. There's a shrinking public pot, so there are less resources available, particularly from the area of paid support. So we need to think more carefully about this. You may have been present at the Just Enough Support webinar that really explored positive approaches to risk. When we think about Just Enough Support, assisted technology is one of the ways that we think about it, and it's very underused currently within service provision. And a lovely story I heard recently was about an older person who was experiencing dementia. And traditionally, what we might do is think about what services would help this person. But what mattered to her was staying at home. And when they looked at the problem they were trying to solve, the problem they were trying to solve was when she went out by herself, sometimes she was becoming confused and forgetting how to get home. So the use of assisted technology really helped here, because rather than her attend a day centre, which would be a traditional response, or have staffing around her, which would be a traditional and very expensive response, she got an iPhone, and they downloaded the Find My iPhone app on the lady's iPhone, and the family had the corresponding app. So if she did go out and became confused or lost, she could find a way back, or others could find her. And that's a creative, proportionate response to managing risk. So that's the end of my presentation today. I hope that it's been useful to have a look at our person-centred approach to risk. Thank you for taking part. I'm going to hand you over to Kerry now to see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Michelle. I don't have any questions.
Thank you very much, and you'll be able to get a copy of this soon from Kerry, won't they?
Yes, once the recording's available, I'll send everybody a link to review the webinar.
Thank you. Okay, bye.